turned them up. I turned them up.
Now we'll start to get to the backwards level. We can stick it out to the weekend. Well, maybe if we have 5 people on Sunday, but hopefully all of you will be one of those 5. Anyone still outside? Yeah, actually, if anyone wants to move this way, it feels weighted, but maybe more people will come in. Or something over here. Curtis doing studies. Well,
Sashi Peki Jushin Natotron Shira Vinchin Benyam Wadi Sangye Shindu Vite Wadi Yogunam Dashing Vajraparshu Idam Guru Ratnamanda Kamnetaya Sangye Chedam Soki Choknama Chanchu Vardu Dani Kyapsuchi Daki Juje Nipe Sanaki Lola Vinchir Sangye Drupasho Sangye Chidam Soki Choknanda Chanchu Vardu Dani Kapsuchi Daki Juje Nipe Sanaki Drola Pinchir Sangye Drupasho Sangye Chidam Soki Choknama Chanchu Vardu Dani Kapsuchi Daki Juje Nipe Sanaki Drola Pinchir Sangye Drupasho
So we'll go straight into a meditation. Please find a comfortable posture. And as directly as possible, once you find your seat, and feel your posture balanced, try to bring your energy down all the way to the soles of your feet, even the tips of your toes if you can. Just watching the vibrations there, the sensations that arise. It's a wonderful way to ground your body and mind quite quickly. And then let that awareness spread to all the points of contact between your body and the cushion or the floor. Already aware of the way these are appearances arising to your mind. And then begin to feel that energy rise through your body. Don't even have to label it with elements today. Just let it be sensations. The experience of uprightness. And find how those internal energies pass through your nostrils in addition to the air. When you sensitize yourself to the sensations of just your nostrils in space, regardless of air passing through them. The bizarre and wondrous experience of having it from the inside. And then as that initial energy of coming into meditation starts to subside, find the rhythm of your breath and And begin to release more into the exhalation. Not stopping it, not deliberately extending it. Not forcing it, but with gentle intention, great care, watching what the breath does. Attending, if you wish, to sensations throughout your whole body, or if you feel more comfortable staying at the nostrils, that's fine too. See what happens as your attention starts to be drawn out. Relax. Release whatever it is that grabbed your attention. And return to the sensations associated with movement of the breath. Taking greater and greater interest in this infinitely subtle and fascinating process. As your whole system starts to calm down, you may be able to note exactly the moment when drowsiness starts to set in after a hot and busy day. Without overcorrecting, without getting yourself agitated again, very gently uplift your awareness, usually on the in-breath, as though you're arousing, awakening your attention throughout your whole body, or if you are just at the tips of the nostrils, there too, you can intensify your attention and your awareness. Just enough to clarify your mind, and then release again in the exhalation. When you begin to find some equilibrium, in general, only you will know when you're ready to begin a new work of setting your motivation, doing a devotional practice. But today we'll rely on our collective energy to draw our mind back to the heart. Let it be an easeful motion, relaxing, sinking back into your core. There are many ways to find the heart chakra. Through love, through devotion, through beauty. But especially strong can be the triggering of compassion. As we access the suffering that is always around us. Try to think of someone you know in particular who's in pain today. And then begin to extrapolate how many people in this city must have a similar problem. How many people in this state, in this country, let your mind expand. Millions upon millions of people just in the human realm who suffer from this particular problem of the person you know. It may be an illness, it may be depression, loss, disappointment, financial worry. Deep problems within a family, addictions, crime. Let your heart keep spreading around our planet. Feeling the collective uncertainty. Of an entire human race searching for happiness. You may call too upon the realm of those who have just passed away, still so present to us. Like an entire realm of those just gone, hovering above this world. Invite them here, those you know about who've just passed away. Whether from natural disaster, fire, war, illness, old age, or dying as an infant. Be aware of that entire world of fear and transition. Call to them, bring them here. Then let your heart cry out to whomever it is you believe knows the way out, knows the way to a realm where pain is no more, to a realm where happiness is possible and lasting. And calling to one who has the wisdom to see the pain of all these living beings at once, to understand it, and to know how to help. And call to one who has the compassion, the unconditional love to want to help, no matter how mixed up or messed up any of us may be. The one who sees us for our highest self. And let that being take form in the space in front of you. If a particularly vivid form came in the last few days, try to call upon the same form so that that presence may grow and clarify and intensify for you. Sometimes, when the presence is very clear, you may not need to go through all the steps. You simply connect. In a place where frustration and offering, compassion and rejoicing, supplication, longing are all wrapped up in one thought. As you simply ask for help. Let that being rise to the crown of your head. And be seated there. Watch how all your energies begin to align as though to a magnet that is now drawing the north pole of your own body at its upper end. Then let this gravitational force for your whole being begin to enter you and descend through your central channel. This axis of light. Shot through the center of your being. And at that very place where your heart opened to all those in need, let the Holy Being come to take his or her throne within you, not to be moved. Then you might ask this being in your heart very specifically for the blessing to understand the meaning of your own mind, how it arises, how it continues, how it passes away, how it creates, and how it perceives, and what creates it. And without breaking your meditation, I suggest you open your eyes very slightly. Relaxing the winds from your heart, but not from your meditation. Let your mind be clear, present. Taking in, without looking around, keeping your gaze very still, taking in the visual objects of sense that arise. The auditory sounds. Detecting if there's any particular smell that arises to you. A taste within your mouth. Recalling again the tactile sensations of your whole body. And then try to note if there's anything you're aware of that doesn't belong in any of those categories. Just relaxing and letting your mind be. Can you hear it? Do pictures arise that are not appearing to your eye contact? memories, vague images from the day. And you hear phrases pass through your thoughts, but nobody's saying to you. If it helps you to close your eyes again, that's fine. This meditation can be done with eyes open or closed. But the most important thing is to distinguish this field of the mental sense, that which you perceive with your clear, wide-awake mind, but does not belong to any of the other five senses. Then can you note subjective impulses, emotions, even subtle ones that arise in response to, or perhaps in anticipation of, the thoughts that are passing before your mind. Can an image arise from traveling today, and then you note how you feel about it? Can an image arise from what you had for lunch, and how you felt about it? I won't trigger those images by suggestion anymore, but I encourage you to be sensitive to both the objective and subjective aspect of each thing that arises. Totally relaxed, just letting the mind be, not getting caught up in it, not stopping it. Retaining this clear, gentle, open state of mind. then very gently release that focus on the mental space alone. And let all your senses open again. Very gently, you can make your own dedication for this meditation right now in your heart. What is it you wish to understand, or who is it you wish to benefit, or all of them together? Did anyone start feeling a little bit uncomfortable as soon as we started just relaxing and watching our mental awareness? Yeah, it's a little unnerving. Like you can, I've had this experience myself, that you can actually feel like you're in a pretty good state of meditation, and then you get into that particular zone, and I'll say more about this form of meditation, this style of meditation. And it's not so comfortable. And yet it's the space we're in all the time because we're listening to our minds all the time. But somehow, because we're not focusing on the fact that that's what's going on, we can manage to be just distracted enough by the outer things that we're engaging with to take it for granted or not quite notice or be totally caught up in those thoughts so that we don't notice the fact that it's happening. We're just engaged in it. We're thinking. This can be an extremely important meditation in so many different ways. I'm curious how many people have done something similar to that before, watching the space of the mind and its contents. Yeah, so it's a classic meditation within Buddhist traditions. It can lead certainly to the higher practices of Mahamudra. It's sort of the direct track. If you can reach stillness, if you can reach shamatha through this method, then it sets you up perfectly for the realizations of Mahamudra. We're not discussing Mahamudra directly in this course, but it's somewhere, it almost lurks implicitly in the background of everything we're looking at. But it's also incredibly powerful, specifically to what we're doing here, for precisely the isolation of what is mental consciousness and what are the objects of mental consciousness that are unique as opposed to the senses. So I left you last night with this question of, yeah, are you trying to get it? Oh, you're
very loud.
Very loud and cold, okay. Please feel free to move as you need. I left you with this question last night of, if we say or believe or are taught and are leaning towards the belief that our experiences are arising from karma, from the ripening of karmic seeds planted through actions of body, speech, and mind in the past. I'll say it that simply for now. Through the record of actions of body, speech, and mind in the past that was planted, that was imprinted when the consciousness of those actions finished. That was the definition we left off with last night. And if we are cultivating a worldview where we believe that that which appears to us is somehow the fruition or the ripening of those past imprints, at a certain level, you start to wonder, well, is it only my mind that is ripening from my karma, but my outer world is still coming from physical things, shared things, out there, material universe, Big Bang stuff things. Or what is the extent to which this ripening within the mind is also producing the objects of the five senses. And we do associate so much with our physical world, thinking that it is what we see with our, or see, hear, smell, taste, and touch with our physical senses. I mean, we can put that in question too. Is the physical world we think is there the one that is accessed by our senses? We were talking about that last night. Or even scientists will readily acknowledge that color, you can't find color in any experiment. You can find the physical substrate or the, and I'm going to say this very wrong, but the energy wavelengths that when they interact with the cells in your eyes produce the experiences of certain colors. But you can't find color in a light ray or in an atom or in even a complex configuration of molecules. You can't find the qualities of sound even in a very sophisticated machine that can pick up vibrations. Is this hearing right now?
Yeah.
I'll just leave that as a rhetorical question. But something's making an imprint, vibrating, shall we say, planting a seed that can be heard later by a mind that's able to hear it. I'm speaking figuratively, don't worry. But we wouldn't really want to say, I mean, I'm sure, again, somebody could debate me, but we don't really want to say that there's an ear consciousness in the recorder. So I said all that just to even loosen our habitual attachment to thinking that the physical world is that which we perceive through our senses. But even if there is a physical world that our senses somehow give us access to, vertical information about, why is it so much easier to believe that the things that arise in our own minds, maybe as the subjective thoughts, reactions, impulses? Oh, of course those things are coming from my mind in the past. Like, it's pretty easy for us to see how our feelings, for example, are our habitual reactions to things. But it's not so easy to see, as I said last night, that the color of the floor is arising again due to the way that a seed for seeing that particular color and identifying it as wood floor was planted in the past. But this is the question that becomes very important in understanding the extent to which the deeds we do and the intentions we do them with could turn into our actual world. And by actual, I mean what we generally mean by it, as in full body experience, all the senses, and the way the mind interprets it. So I tried to leave you with that uncomfortable question of, if everything, and I'll just jump to that, everything is arising from the ripening of karmic seeds, then why do we need sense faculties at all? Because in a sense, that's what the mind-only school argument is starting to lead to. If the sense faculty itself is being produced by the seed, and the thing that the faculty perceives and the consciousness perceives is also being produced by the seed, okay, that's fun. Is it? I don't know. It's interesting that a seed can ripen into an object, a consciousness, and a faculty and a consciousness of it. Well, why do we need all that? I mean, couldn't we all, just live in our minds all the time? The example came up in a conversation afterward last night of, what would it mean if we actually all were just dreaming? We're all in our own dreams right now, and our dreams happen to be similar enough that we can have conversations in this room. I mean, this could be a dream, right? I mean, I felt a shift. Right? We all realized, oh, this actually, I've had dreams this vivid. I mean, I've seen colors, people I recognize. Why not? Do you ever feel after a dream like you really met the person who was in the dream? Like that their mind stream, whoever they are, was actually with you? It's rare, but we sometimes can have that experience. So what's the difference? I don't actually expect anyone to answer now, but if anyone has a really strong impulse. We're going to think about it for several days, at least, I hope, a lifetime. But some of the problems that come up in the Umagong Barab cell are not the ones that would have come up to our minds and just like, this is how profound these texts are, that they're like, we can think about these things for a long time. But I have a sense that Master Chandrakirti and Jensen Kappa and the whole lineage of great masters who thought about these things will always manage to come up with a problem a bit more sophisticated than we managed to come up with in thinking about it ourselves. So maybe that's just my prejudice, but. One point that I want to emphasize in terms of the mind-only school, and sorry for those who haven't been here, I can't actually review every time, so we're just jumping in. One of the points I think essential to grasping why the mind-only school is presented in the way it does, and if one tries to understand Master Sangha as Arya Sangha, a realized being who taught or wrote the scriptures he did through both the scriptures as the inspiration of Maitreya, the direct transmission of Maitreya, and also the books that Sangha wrote apparently by his own pen, as a method that would help people further in the teachings. The Master Sangha that I've had the privilege to spend some direct face-to-face time with the Tibetan on is the Mahayana Sangraha, which means the compendium or the summary of the Greater Way, the Mahayana. And I marveled to see that the entire text is about karma. The entire text is about how karma ripens out of the foundation consciousness and how you can come to see that the whole world is arising from this karmic storehouse. And he really presents it as what earlier generations were not ready to hear. Almost. This is the view of the Mahayana that we weren't ready to teach earlier. And I'm ready to say this. I have not read all the works of Master Sangha or Maitreya, so this is a mere conjecture on my part. But I don't think Master Sangha himself was ever explicitly saying that this foundation consciousness exists through characteristics of its own, or that the mind through which things are established exists through characteristics of its own. That phrase might not even have existed, actually, at that time, because you can even make the argument that Svalakshena Siddhi, established through characteristics of its own, didn't even appear in Chandrakirti. That was one of those interpolations of Jetsalkapa. It might only appear once or twice in the works of Chandrakirti, and we're not even sure he meant that by it. So contemporary scholars really want to say this is an innovation of Jetsalkapa to make the whole distinction around existing through characteristics of its own, or existing by definition. So one has to think of it more by implication, that there's something about this view of foundation consciousness, and it's clear that not even all those of the mind-only school accepted the foundation consciousness. You think of, Alaya, that's the mind-only school view. There were even mind-only school proponents who didn't accept the Alaya, and there were mind-only school proponents who did accept outer form. So nothing goes across the board. But the view that is being refuted by Chandrakirti, and this is much later, by probably the 8th century, mid-8th century, is a view that involves both the assertion of a foundation consciousness as a separate consciousness, an 8th consciousness. So we just went through the 6 in our meditation. A typical mind-only school view asserts a 7th and an 8th consciousness. We don't need to worry about the 7th so much here. It has to do with the way that what's called the afflicted mind or the afflicted, as Alan Walls translates it, afflicted mentation, the minding that grabs on to the things that appear from the foundation consciousness and says I about them. And that's, for various technical reasons, within a mind-only school context, says that has to be a separate consciousness also, because it has to be able to work even when the mental consciousness is dormant, as in not just states of deep dreamless sleep, but states of meditation in formless realm where it's called no mind, and certain other extreme cases. But that's one of the reasons the mind-only school says they have to be separate consciousnesses, because something still has to soar the seeds and something still has to be grasping at an eye, even when mental consciousness isn't working. But for Chandakirti, and even more clearly so for Jetsokapa, if you assert the seventh and the eighth, and in particular the eighth consciousness, it seems to imply that you hold consciousness to have a nature of its own. And likewise, if you want to assert that consciousness is really the only thing that's working, both foundation consciousness perpetuating the seeds and then the seeds ripening as consciousness, but you don't want to assert form as having any reality, then that also is putting the metaphysical weight all on consciousness. So again, what I'm trying to say is that historically we have a lot of uncertainty, and this is the scholar in me that's really ready to acknowledge we have still very slim understanding of what these Indian masters meant in their own context, in their own time. But if we trust the depth of the tradition and the insights of Jetsokapa in interpreting what they meant, and he's very confident that he understands what they mean, then we can trust his interpolations in saying, oh, Chandakirti doesn't like this particular version of the mind-only school because it puts all the weight on consciousness as having characteristics of its own. And that's the phrase he uses over and over again, Rangitseni ki drupa. In course 15, it's generally translated as existing by definition, which is fine. Rangitseni means its definition by definition. I personally just avoid it because in my own mind, I think I grew up hearing, oh, it exists by definition, as in by the very definition of the thing, therefore it exists. And that could be what this means, but sometimes I think colloquially we mean something a little bit different by that. So just for the benefit of the doubt, I've landed on existing through characteristics. But please know that that's exactly the same as in ACI course 15, existing by definition. Yeah.
Question about that. So you're saying that if something exists by definition, that it would have characteristics. And that's like, if something has characteristics, it would imply that there's some nature.
Yeah. So this great question, and I hope it'll come clearer as we go, but I will spend a moment on it now. Existing through its own characteristics or through its own definition. It's the same word in Tibetan and Sanskrit that could be characteristic or definition. That's the point that I need all of you to realize. And I'll just say it. Lakshana is the stuff that makes something what it is, the defining characteristics. And in Tibetan, that's Rangitseni. Now the word, I will break it up for you. Tsen is the honorific for name. Tseni, the very name, is the word for definition. In the monastery, when you're doing kids class debating, give me the definition for this. Tseni sha. It's just the word for definition. There's no doubt about that, but that's the correct translation for it. Rangitseni would mean its own definition. But the thing is that tseni, insofar as it translates the Sanskrit word lakshana and sva lakshana, meaning own defining characteristics, And because the word sen can also mean the mark, the characteristics of something, as they say, the honorific for its name, and the tsenyi can also be the very defining characteristics of a thing. You see how closely related they are as ideas, even in English as well. When we say that the flower does not exist by definition, can somebody give me the definition of a flower? Sorry, not so easy, right? That wasn't my point. Yeah, so let's ask a botanist. But in this case, the defining characteristics would be things like the yellowness, would be things like the shape, would be things like even the fact of it existing at a certain place at a certain time. The rangi tsenyi often end up being defined in terms of unique and non-transferable location, qualities, and time. So even within the Sao Chandrika school, not even getting into the mind-only school, the rangi tsenyi of my fingernail right now is like its coordinates in space-time with a quality to it. There's a kind of, I almost want to say there's a scientific thinking to this thing about rangi tsenyi, because it could get that granular, as in, well, of course it's not the way it appears to any of you or me or an instrument. We could get into quantum theory about the rangi tsenyi of my fingernail. But the state of mind that says it must have rangi tsenyi in order to be there is the same state of mind that a quantum physicist might bring if they say, well, even though the thing doesn't exist there until our mode of observation and the questions we ask of it have been set up and the experiment has been performed, we still believe that the information we get from it is objectively true and is telling us something about reality. There's something very similar in the thinking, my sense is, in this idea of svalakshana. So svalakshana does occur in the Sanskrit tradition. I didn't mean to suggest that it doesn't. It's the established through svalakshana, svalakshana siddhi, that's very hard to find in Sanskrit literature. But Jason Kappa uses all the time the idea of something that could be established as existing through the unique particular characteristics that are really there at a particular, what's the word? Non-transferable, unique, indubitable location in space-time. That help?
I remember that saying characteristic of is the way that.
Oh, that's something completely different.
Yeah,
but thank you for bringing it up.
I remember that all it means is that it would have an nature.
Not quite. In the ACI courses, the phrase characteristic of, as in chicheja, where you have a quality and something that is characteristic of that quality. Is that what you're referring to?
That also is in ACI.
Yeah, that's the main place in ACI where the word characteristic of shows up. I'm not going to get into that now, but that is a teaching from the Sao Chandrika school, but Geshe Michael has given it as the doorway to high middle way view. So please don't confuse what we're talking about here with that teaching, even though I'm using the word characteristic. Extremely briefly, that's where you have a quality, like what can everybody see? Tanka. You have a mental image for tanka, and everybody here, I hope, has heard the word before, right? tanka, and you have a mental image, and you can see that this is characteristic of the quality tanka, just as there are 5 more things over there that are characteristic of the quality tanka. You see how I use the word characteristic of there? And that is extremely important to the teaching on quality, chi, and cheja, those things which are characteristic of a quality. That's both intimately related with what we're talking about here and not the same teaching. So I don't want to get them confused. Because Arangitseni in that irrepeatable, I think that's what I wanted to say, totally unique moment in space-time. Now I said it had a quality to it that we can't call it a chi, but we can call it a defining characteristic. It can only be known through a chi. It can only be known through an abstraction. And this gets into the relationship between the idea of characteristics of its own and Dharmakirti's logic system. And Dharmakirti, even in his book on valid perception, is said to be a mind-only school thinker. So really getting in deep on the question of logic and what's the difference between the changing thing that's there and the way we perceive it through abstractions or through quality, quote car, quote tanka, will push one into really questioning whether there's anything behind those qualities that has its own characteristics. But here, now what I mean by own characteristics or existing by definition would be the thing that's there with its own quality, and that quality is not an abstraction, but that quality is really in it. But the reason I went down to the minutiae is because even those who have thought this through very, very clearly acknowledge that you have to get down to the minutiae to even find those things that have their own characteristics or their own defining characteristics. Now some of the examples come in about color, and I'm still kind of confused about that because they can say it's a quality of having a mottled color, and that's its own characteristic of having mottled color. So that already has diversity to it, and I'm still confused by that example. But in general, the typical examples of a thing that has its own characteristics would be a single instant of mind, or a single particle of matter. Okay, now thank you. You've taken me right back to the point that I needed to make, which is the mind-only school has said, well, if consciousness is being produced by the karmic tendencies, then each moment of consciousness, yeah, it's got to have its own characteristic because it's really there. It's carrying the foundation consciousness is carrying the tendencies, and the consciousness it's ripening into is the result of the tendencies. This is a causal process. It's really there. And notice this is a way of thinking where in order to cause, things have to have their own nature. In this, so far, the word having its own nature and having its own characteristic are pretty much synonymous. Jetsakapa holds that they are synonymous, but the words are still used in slightly different ways. Shingidrupa, established through its own nature, or Rangitsenikidrupa, established through characteristics of its own. It's like those are parallel things, and in a very few cases, they don't quite mean the same thing. But the mind-only school is saying, yeah, sure, consciousness is functional. It's got to have a nature of changing so that it can move from moment to moment. But if you don't need form to trigger consciousness, because consciousness is being triggered by the karmic tendency, form must not have characteristics of its own. And the mind-only school proponents, this is a phrase I like to use because we're not talking about Master Asanga specifically, and we're not actually talking about anybody in particular. We're talking about the general group that Master Chandakirti is refuting. They say, well then, outer matter, defined the way the Abhidharmists do, where there are concrete instances of physical stuff that have a unique location and a unique time and a unique quality, don't exist, because mind is what is producing everything. And furthermore, if all things are only being understood by means of these namparikpa vijñapti, the word it's a very technical word that sort of means means of cognizing something. Cognizers. Sometimes namrek have been translated as cognizers. I haven't even really worked out my own translation for it because I tried to avoid the word. I'm still quite confused by it. But essentially, if you learned about constructs in course 15, it's the stuff the constructs work with. These categories of, and I don't have them memorized, so I'm not going to, but basically form, color, shape, and then more complex things than that. The construct through which our world is divided up. If, according to the mind-only school, and now we're getting into the crux of it, in the context of what we've been discussing, the real dependent things, if you remember that phrase, shenwang, are the bakchaks. The functioning things in the mind-only school are karmic tendencies and consciousness. And the world that are created by them. So it becomes almost a moot point of, well, is the form of the outer object that I see, even though it's not really an outer object, does it still exist through characteristics of its own, even though all I perceive of it is my construct of it, which is not real? You know, if you remember that whole dynamic of the three natures of the mind-only school, it gets really gnarly, shall we say, trying to figure out what the dependent things are, because they keep defining them as that which is not made up in your mind, that which has to be there in order for your construct about it to make any sense, in order for there to be an absence. Somebody over here said a blob and a thing on the blob. In order for the constructs, in order for the blob to be empty of the construct, in order for there to be an emptiness which is totally established, yong sudrupa, yong drup, which is the absence of the constructs in the real stuff, you have to have the real stuff. So for mind-only school, you pull out any one of those three, you destroy the rest, if you remember that before. But the more that I've sat with this, the more I've realized that it is those bakchaks that end up being the real dependent thing in the mind-only school. And since I say that, there's something I'll read to you on that. That sounded like a whole tangential argument, but I think I've actually covered almost all the points I wanted to in regard to it. So, and we'll break soon, but I want to find how about we take a 10-minute break and I'll find this quotation for you, and see you at 5 to 9.
say that they truly exists.
Exist through characteristics of their own, but don't exist truly, and that's
So they don't truly exist.
because they're still a loser.
They don't, they consider to be not independent, but to be exist dependent.
Yeah, we'll get into it.
But if it's then if they exist independently, then they're empty and they don't truly exist.
Jitsukapa's point is they want to say they don't exist really, but they do exist through characteristics of their own, and Jitsukapa wants to say that doesn't make sense. If you say it has characteristics of its own, it must exist really. He refutes both of them. He refutes both of them, but he says one is tantamount to the other.
Both are tendencies and consciousness you refuse?
No, it's this series of words. I'll get it. I'll do it for everybody. Everybody needs to know. I'll do it.
I know that one
There's a lot of stuff that's I'm sorry, I don't.
It's just how it is there.
The